you've received many honors out there in the cold, cruel world and have had a lot of success with your compositions, but I think it must be a special thrill to come home and have a new composition that you can have your alma mater play.
Oh, of course, absolutely, because for several reasons. Number one, just the idea of having a brand new piece performed is exciting, and particularly by excellent ensembles like we have here at Midpark. I've just been delighted with that experience, and my training all got started right here. I was in the band, the chorus, the orchestra, performing in all three ensembles. And I really can honestly say that my career got started right here, actually, in this auditorium, because the memories flood back about being on the stage and being in the orchestra and the band concerts, and it was just always very exciting. So indeed, to be back home, to be with great musicians, it's on so many different levels. It's very exciting.
I'd like to sort of take you back there. First of all, you mentioned three different ensembles. What did you play in them?
Well, in the orchestra, I played cello, and in the band, I played string bass. And that was my senior year, and I realized by my junior year that this was going to be my life. And so I wanted to get as much and as many different musical experiences, and particularly take advantage of the sort of the wonderful faculty that was here. And so that was joining the band, and then with chorus, I accompanied the chorus on piano. I sang with the chorus now and then, although my voice was not terrific. I was much more of a pianist than a singer, although in the a cappella stuff, I would join in. And for a musician, ear training is great. And nothing in the world like being able to sing that stuff and get those pitches work together. So it was getting those different experiences. Mm-hmm.
Which one of those instruments and voice did you consider primary at the time?
Well, actually, piano is my main instrument. I had studied that since I was a youngster, and that was always sort of my main focus. And then realizing that I really enjoyed composing, which came about in 11th, 12th grade. A little bit in 10th grade I had started writing music, but it was mainly towards the end of my high school years. And I have to say each one of the ensembles here performed my music. And that says a lot for the teachers, that I had. And I have to say their names: Norman Ludwig, my orchestra teacher, and Larry Howes, the choral conductor, and James Fidali, my band director. And they each encouraged me as a composer and were very willing to program my music. And those were my first pieces. Those were the pieces I submitted to get accepted into college. So it's not hyperbole when I say how much this school has meant to me.
And piano, who taught you piano?
Well, I had several different teachers. Edwin Erickson was a major teacher for me. George Cherry as well. Those were the teachers that I had throughout my junior high and high school years. Prior to that time, I had Mrs. Hassenmuller, whose first name I don't know, and I don't think I ever knew other than Mrs. Hassenmuller, and a few other teachers very early on. I even remember my very, very first teacher, Mrs. Mainwaring, when I was 5 years old, and so it was just great having that. So piano was my main instrument.
So you felt committed as a musician at
Yes.
Midpark, and then you went off to college, which was
Right.
Eastman, right?
Yes.
And who were your influences there?
Eastman was terrific. It's a very imaginative school. They do a lot of new music. They do old music. They have a great jazz department there. And it was that variety of experiences that you get at a school like Eastman that really, I think, helped me as a composer, because it opened my eyes to a lot of different possibilities, gave me ideas on how to use different kinds of musical languages. And the teachers there, as a composer, you study with a different teacher each year as a composition major, which is rather unusual for a lot of conservatories. Sometimes, you focus, you have one major teacher, which, in all honesty, is an instrumentalist, and that's the way they do the instruments at Eastman as well. You stick with the same teacher because you're learning a technique, which can take years to take years to develop. I'm still a composer here. But with composition, because there's so many different styles to choose from, I think Eastman is very kind of wise in encouraging their composition students to go from teacher to teacher, because then you can learn these different styles, because there's a myriad of styles for composers to choose. And Samuel Adler, Joseph Schwantner, Warren Benson, and a man named Eugene Kurtz, who is basically in Europe, but he was there for one semester. And those were my teachers there. Yeah.
So in terms of your developing style, here you are at Midpark and then you go to Eastman. Did you feel yourself changing dramatically in what you considered significant or the kinds of choices you made in your compositions?
Oh yeah, but you know, as a composer, it still happens even now. You are always learning new things. For students nowadays, they don't always realize that you really do remain a student your whole life. And as a composer, having started out here at Midpark and then going to Eastman, jazz, for example, now they have jazz here. When I was a student, I think jazz was really sort of just beginning as part of a big part of the curriculum. And so it was really learning the sound world of jazz, because jazz was sort of on an equal level with the concert music division at Eastman. And composers like Joseph Schwantner, who was really opening up these doors to different kinds of possibilities, the use of percussion, and a lot of percussion, the use of different kinds of rhythms and stuff to create different kinds of sounds. This was the early 70s. And composers like George Crumb and Elliott Carter were the big influences at that time. And college offers you the opportunity, when you realize that that's what you want to focus on, really learning the sound world of all these various composers. And I would take from that and learn from that and adapt sometimes my own style to that.
And then what attracted you to the Big Apple?
Well, a few different things. There was a teacher there that I was really intrigued about studying with, Milton Babbitt, who became my teacher then for 4 years at Juilliard. And he is sort of a legendary name in the American 20th century music and now 21st century music. He's still extremely active and has many students at Juilliard right now. And his approach towards serial technique was fascinating, and I enjoyed how he taught me certain things, for example, not to coast in music. In other words, every moment should be leading someplace. He would get so excited about the sound of a certain chord or a certain interval, and wow, that would become sort of infectious. And so I enjoyed studying with him. And I liked, as a composer, being in a place, New York being so big, that you have a lot of opportunities to listen to a lot of different kinds of new music. And I enjoyed that.
So you're saying, with Milton Babbitt particularly, although you were being taught a 12-tone technique, which
yes.
some people think of as being really formulaic and full of charts,
yes.
that he was teaching you a way of taking even something like that and making it really personal and really sensual, I suppose, at the same time.
Absolutely, yeah. Gunther Schuller, I remember, had described Mr. Babbitt as being one of the most musical of all composers. And the big thing is that it was the ear, it was sounds. Now, granted, everybody hears music a little bit differently, but that was a big part of Mr. Babbitt's music. And I should also say this: one of his favorite composers is Brahms, and I wanted to find out what that was all about, and then I saw what he enjoyed in Brahms' music, which was sometimes the grandeur of it, sometimes the beautiful sort of construction of it, because, and this was, I think, an important thing, and I don't think this is formulaic or mathematical when you describe it, but it is the fact that music exists in time, so that the audience enjoys hearing repetitions, and it's a way that those repetitions are occurring, that you're taking them on a journey. And Babbitt really gave a lot of that to me.
I've always thought, and I've shared it with my own students, that hearing a recapitulation or a reprise in a piece makes the heart beat a little bit faster. It's the sort of thing, or people at a Pops concert who hear just the beginning introduction of a song they know well. It's that repetition or that recognition that really has a power over you.
Yeah, and it's a coming home. It's somehow attaching a certain feeling to that, and it's true. It's fascinating. And as a composer, we are influenced by that.
Now, I'm amazed in reading your webpage, which gave me all kinds of information about you that I might not have found any other way, that you graduated, I think, from Juilliard in 1980, and yet became a faculty member virtually right away. How did that come about?
Yes, well, I started teaching in 1980 in the pre-college division, which is a Saturday class. That's Saturday. It's a full day. It's not just a class where the students study their own instrument or composition, whatever their major is. They have classes in ear training and theory, orchestra, and additional classes that they can take. So it's a full day thing, and I did enjoy teaching that. In that division, I lived in New York, and New York is, you have to do a lot to be able to live there. In other words, it's expensive, it's very exciting, but it can be somewhat difficult. And initially, in addition to my teaching there, I would do a lot of tutoring, and little by little, I started teaching in the college in the, about the early 80s. And that became sort of my second home there.
So, not only are you a composer and you've taught composition, but you teach literature and materials of music, which I don't even understand.
Well, literature and materials of music is essentially theory and analysis. So we describe it, the materials being the kind of the background theory. But the reason, this was actually, it was a class sort of designed by William Schumann. And, you know, a lot of, in American education, so many of us are doing some similar things. We sometimes give them different titles. But yeah, I've noticed in my travels recently that so many schools are encouraging their students, in terms of learning the basics, to also be able to compose. That's become a new thing where the students are having to write assignments, write fugues, write a motet. That's become a big thing, and I think that's good for performers. So I will help performers with that. And then the literature, simply meaning that much of the music we analyze comes from the music that they're playing. For example, I have several voice majors in one of my L&M classes this year, and so sure enough, we're looking at vocal literature.
L&M, for a moment I thought, that's not illegal, is it?
Right. No.
But that's very interesting that you've talked about your teachers who taught you about structure and the way to make a piece really work. And then you've talked about your own teaching that does that, and also your relationship with people in the pre-college department, which means that you've always been exposed to people of the age of the students here at Midpark.
Yes, exactly. And it's, oh boy, sharing information and also seeing them grow and develop from getting new ideas, kind of sharing my art form with them. And so it's a way of letting that music keep going.
So now we've arced all the way back to where we are in the auditorium at Midpark High. How did this particular commission, this Fantasia for Band, as it's called, right? How did this come about?
Well,
and what's been going on?
Sure. I got an email. This was about 2 years ago from the director of the wind ensemble, Hilary Holtzhaus, and she was just wonderful. I felt I got a chance to know her right away through the email, in which she was wondering if I'd be interested in writing a piece for my old alma mater's band that she was now conducting, and I loved the idea. I had previously written a piece for the Berea High School band, so now I've done both of the high schools in the Berea City School District, written a piece for. And what she had said was that she had a wonderful band, and she thought it might be, you know, exciting for the students to work with a living composer. And so this was it. And so this year, I was able to write the piece, and it's hot off the presses. I mean, we're talking about just a matter of weeks ago that the piece was actually finished. And she got little bits and pieces of it prior to that time. And the first time that she got a piece of music and she emailed me and she says, "Oh, this is going to be fine," I thought, good, you know, I get a thumbs up with that. And today I've been working with the ensemble, and it's been just wonderfully exciting. And Andrew Winters, the conductor of the concert band, and they had also wondered if they could do yet another piece of mine. And so that was the piece that they're going to be performing is really only the second performance of this work. And so both ensembles here at Midpark are each playing a work of mine.
That's fantastic. I couldn't help noticing when we sat down that you have pencils in your pocket.
Oh, yes.
And you were mentioning that not only is the score to the Fantasia hot off the press,
right,
but because you're a living composer and you're watching and listening to how it works, you're making changes even up to the last moment.
That's right. And today there were some, at this point, it's mainly sort of cosmetic changes along the lines of articulation, dynamics. When I hear the resonance in the hall, I get a sense of, oh, wow, maybe it should move this way. And it was simply, but that sort of happens anytime that you have a performance. But particularly for a first performance, adjustments need to be simply worked out.
How did you work with the students today? Did you just make comments on their rehearsal and suggest tempo things or balance things, or? Exactly.
I'd be sitting, a combination. Sometimes I'd be sitting in the audience. Sometimes I'd be right up on the stage with a music score with both ensembles. Because the other piece, as I said, this is only its second real, you know, performance. And so that piece is still relatively new as well. And there'll be certain kinds of textures that I'll want, certain voices that I'll want to bring out, and I'll simply ask the players if they could do that, and actually working with the conductors, because they're the ones who are really giving the interpretation to the music. So in some cases, it's a dialogue simply between me and the conductors, saying, well, would it be okay if this happens? And then we sort of combine our ideas that way.
The name Fantasia implies a sort of free-form thing. I originally heard it might be called fanfare for band, which is a very different thing, and I think of the fanfare for the common man or a Baron Copeland or something like that. But a Fantasia really gives you much more freedom to do whatever you want.
Right.
So what happens in this piece?
Well, the idea originally, pieces develop and grow as you write them, just like a piece develops as you're performing it. A performance you give this year may be very different from a performance you may give a couple of years down the line. You feel the music differently. So what the fanfare, originally I was going to write sort of a heroic kind of sounding, relatively brief piece in terms of just creating a nice impact. But as I was writing the piece, much of it was sort of dramatic. And the piece suddenly became longer. And what happened was that I realized that I wanted to have passages that were somewhat lyrical, passages that did have a nice, strong, dramatic chorale sound, and then parts of it that could be sort of playful. So those three elements, the playful, the lyrical, and the dramatic, suddenly became part of this, as you said, somewhat of a free form. But Mr. Babbitt says, let's make sure that in time the audience enjoys, you know, kind of returning. So some of the material, indeed, you kind of revisit through the course of the piece.
Well, that's a fascinating insight into some of your creative process. I know that authors sometimes talk about creating a character or a few characters, and they sit back and watch them interact. And it sounds almost as if you created these themes and ideas in a basic structure and then watched it evolve on its own.
That's right, that's right. Now, you're, as a composer, you play certain chords, and you realize, wow, these chords are big, and I want them to be heard again. It's like you have a piece of chocolate cake and you want another bite of it and then one more bite of it, all right? And so you get those chords and, oh, that may be it. Or you get a certain situation where it's made a certain impact and that's all you need. You don't need to state it in any other way. And in both cases, sometimes you don't know until you're creating it at that moment.
Did you find any surprises today in terms of how it sounds? I know you're able to hear it on your computer as you write it. You're able to certainly imagine what it would sound like. But in the real world, when suddenly the ensemble is playing it, what happens that's different?
Well, I'll have to say, in every case, I was delighted. The reason being things like the balance, and part of it is that the groups are so terrific, but in terms of balances, in some cases I thought, is this melody, should I have written that out a little bit more? I was concerned, you know, when I'm looking at the music, that there's no key signatures, but it's tonal, but it keeps changing and shifting keys, and then even on the plane going over here, I had the score out the entire time. People ask, how was your plane ride? Well, the whole plane ride was spent looking at the score, second guessing myself. It's like, oh no, is this harmony gonna nicely resolve to this new area, or is it gonna sound too surprising, too many changes? And I was delighted that there was room to breathe. And I also have to say, it's been interesting for me, it's a learning experience watching the conductors work, because the way that they will extract certain chords and make sure that they're perfectly in tune, because then the chord really can ring and it allows that room to breathe. Now, in a few cases, I realized that I had miscalculated and that it needs an extra crescendo here to build towards that section, or it needs a retardando to suddenly, again, move towards another section. A lot of times these are in transition sections, how to go to the next element of the story, musical story you're telling.
I heard a number of your pieces online, and I must thank you for putting them online and even putting snippets of your scores there so people can really experience some of you beforehand. But I also read some of the reviews that indicate that, rather strangely, you're a very listenable composer. That I read a fan letter almost, someone saying, in comparing you to Prokofiev, who will be remembered hundreds of years from now, that your music is intrinsically musical and lyrical and available, that in spite of the fact that you've studied with some composers who at times can write very extremely, that you've made the music continue to be something that can reach a typical audience member. And I think people hearing this interview and hearing this band concert at the very same time will be able to nod and say, you know what? He's right. that is listenable and it is persuasive. So how do you manage to maintain that approachability, the workability of your music?
Yes, well, part of it is I love the idea of communicating very distinct emotions. And I want to tell that story. And a lot of times what I like to present in the music is lyricism. Writing particularly for band instruments, maybe that's another reason why I switched the name from fanfare, because a lot of times, for example, brass instruments are associated with those big tutti sections. By tutti, I mean, you know, the big, where they're all playing together, and sort of big and bright and bold, but, you know, it's also fun to see that they can really play in a contrasting way as well, and to get that sort of lyricism there. And so, oftentimes, my music tends to have these melodic ideas. And I love the idea that I am communicating those with audiences. And what I say is, for me, when I'm writing music, I have to enjoy what I'm writing. We don't always know who our audience is. No composer does. And the audiences change. And we don't really know who we're writing for. So a lot of times, I'm writing for myself, but you know, almost more than that, I write for the performers. I want the performers to be able to say, we enjoy being able to sing this line, or we enjoy being able to join together and do a heroic chorale, or be able to create a really kind of cool rhythm. So I like the idea that the performers are having a good time. And if I like it, and then the performers like it, then chances are we're going to sweep along the audience as well and get them involved.
I'm glad you said that, because I heard, before we started talking, that the students were absolutely thrilled with their interactions with you and with the pieces. They've had a wonderful time, and I think our audience that will have heard your words and your music at about the same time will be able to note that the music comes from a human being that they can respond to, who communicates both with his words and shares his emotions that way, and certainly shares them clearly and persuasively through his music. So I really want to thank you for coming. I hope you'll come again often.
Oh, Bob, I appreciate those words. Thanks very much.
Congratulations and welcome.
You.